trying to develop your poster on your computer, there's some really important things you need to think about. Now, the first thing is you need to think of a way to present your ideas in a graphical format. So although you might have written a 2,000-word essay, and have some really good, strong arguments and research in there, you shouldn't really just open that essay and copy, say, 2,000 words and then try and put that straight on your poster, because it just won't work. So what you need to do is try to conceptualize a visual way to represent that idea or that argument. Now, this is really key. And lots of students and lots of staff as well, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, will just jump straight in at the deep end and sit down at their computer and try and come up with a brilliant design and a brilliant layout for their poster. And 9 times out of 10 it's going to take a lot longer to do that than if you'd sat down with a piece of paper and a pencil and just written down the key things you want to include, some rough scribbles on where you want things to appear on your page. That's really going to help you when you actually try to produce the actual poster. So the other thing you need to think about is who your actual audience is going to be. So that's who's going to be looking at and reading the content of your poster. Now, to give you an idea, let's consider for a minute that you're a professor of psychology and you've written a really, really good research paper and produced a really highly academic poster about that piece of research. Now, if you're going to go to present your poster at another psychology conference, and there's going to be lots of other psychologists there, then it's fine to use, technical and specialist terminology on that poster, because they're going to understand what the points you're making. But if you're going to present that poster at a more general conference, let's suppose at Marjon, where there's lots of other staff who would be interested in the sorts of things you're looking at, but aren't necessarily other psychologists, then it might be useful to try and tone that terminology down to try and make it more appropriate for that particular audience. And my final point here is quite key, and that is posters should be eye-catching. Now again, to use the example that we might be presenting our poster at a conference, this conference could be a national conference or an international conference with hundreds of or even thousands of other posters in the same exhibition or in the same room. So how do you make people, the person just walking past, take an interest in your poster? Well, that's easy. You just need to make it eye-catching. So that's going to be using a blend of nice, attractive colours, good visuals, bold text, shocking statements to try and make it as appealing as possible. And when those people see that poster, they'll want to go and read the content. Now, size and quality is going to be really important, and it's quite important that you actually do some setup before you start developing your poster. And it's really key, this one. And the thing you need to consider is that you need to design your poster. So when you're producing it on your computer, you need to be designing it at the actual size it's going to be printed. So why would you want to do that? Well, to give you an example here, if you were, say, creating an A4 poster in Word, and you were going to, print it at A1 size, which is a kind of quite a standard size for posters, you're actually going to see a really, really significant drop in quality. So to give you this kind of graphical example, so you take the picture on the left, the A4 image of this flower, you can see that the actual photo is quite sharp and it looks okay. But on the image on the right, when we've blown it up to A1 size, you can see that the image is now blurry, it's a bit pixelated and a bit blocky, and it's not very clear of what it actually even is. And this is a visual example of what's going to happen. Basically, that the printer's going to stretch and pull your images and your text to fit that size. So it's really important you start at A1 and you design it and produce it at that size, and then this blurring effect is going to be minimal, if at all. So where possible, you need to be kind of designing your poster at what we call high resolution. So in this case, 300 dpi. DPI stands for dots per inch. So if you consider, say, an inch square, that's the amount of dots or pixels that occupy that space. So most printers will actually be printing at 300 dpi, which is quite a high quality. Whereas a lot of the materials that you download from, say, the internet, image-wise, are going to be at 72 dpi, which is the resolution that monitors and screens work off. So that's why if you've ever printed an image, say, from Google Image Search, and it's looked nice and crisp and clean on the screen, but then when you printed it, it's all blurry and pixelated, it's because, screens work at a low resolution, whereas printers work at a high resolution. So it's going to be really important that you're trying to design your poster in this high resolution to start with. Generally speaking, conferences, for example, will ask for a poster at A1 size, so I've provided those measurements there. But also, you might find you need to do A0 posters in some cases. If you need to do A0, then obviously just look up the dimensions on the internet. So these dimensions will be key, and you'll need to put these into whatever package you use, and we'll talk about packages later on, to start with. So you'll basically be setting up your paper dimensions at A1, for example, before you even start, putting your text in, putting your images in, etc. Now let's talk about colour. What you need to do with colour is basically don't go mad. Try to stick to a few colours that complement each other. So just as you would if you were, say, decorating your house or your flat, you try to pick several nice colours that complement each other and work well. Now to help you pick your colours, you can use really useful tools called colour wheels. Now, this one that I presented you here, this colour.adobe.com, is just an example. There's loads available on the internet. And basically what they'll do is let you pick, say, a starting colour, say like a nice blue, and then give you lots of different ways to pick complementary or contrasting colours. And that could be a really useful way to produce a colour palette before you start. And the good thing about this colour.adobe.com is you can actually upload an image, and it will pick out some colours from that image and tell you which colours will work well with that image. So if you've got a photograph that's the centrepiece of your poster and you're worried about colour clashing and not sure what colours will work well with that image, then it'll be a great way to start, upload it to that website, let that website do the technical bit and tell you which colours to use, and then just use those to produce your poster. Again, you need to consider your audience. So although you might like a colour combination, try to take a step back, maybe ask another student or another colleague to look at it and, see if they agree and, it is a nice colour combination. Whereas, something like lime green text on a red background is not going to be very easy to read. So you're definitely not thinking about your audience if you're picking those colours. And again, be very wary of using high contrast colours. Although what I would say is if you want to, say, use a shocking pink or something, in certain cases that's going to be good because that's going to, again, draw someone's eye to your poster. So going back to my point about earlier on, how does your poster stand out in a room of 100 posters? It will be to use those shocking, really bold colours. But again, only in moderation. Don't go wild with them. Getting the right layout is key, really, in terms of how readable your poster actually is. Now, what you can actually do with a poster, and it seems obvious, but lots of people don't use them, is just use columns to help present and structure your information. So if you take the idea of a portrait poster, most people just present all the information as one big, long column of information. But that's not a very efficient way to present lots of information. You can actually use columns, maybe 2 or 3 columns on a portrait poster to present lots of different information. You can use blocks and breaking things up with images and charts, and you can actually get a cleaner, crisper presentation and get a lot more content on your poster by using those columns. But one important thing to consider when you are using columns, you don't want to be putting lots of arrows in to try and show the flow of your document or your information. So if you've got arrows going all over the place and it's not immediately obvious basically where one bit of information flows from the next, then you probably haven't got a great layout, so you probably want to rethink it. Again, I keep going over it. If you sit down at the start and do some rough sketches of page layout first, it's really going to help in terms of how the poster looks basically and how it reads. And your poster should be well structured, just like any other piece of academic writing. So, for example, if you've done a bit of research and you're doing a poster on research output, you might want to consider, starting at the top with a title, and then again using columns. Include things like introduction, methodology, results, discussion, conclusion, and then end with references. Obviously, not all posters will need the same information, so it'll be up to you to dictate what's important, what you can leave off, because again, you don't want to have too much information on your poster, not too much text. And talking about text, there's a few things you need to remember. Firstly, title text should be visible from around 6 meters away. So you're going to want to use, I've said 48 point text or larger. You'll probably find 48 is a little bit small. So again, consider your poster being in the corner of a room and people are just walking past. The bigger your title is, the more chance you've got of catching their eye and then being interested in your topic enough to go and have a look at your poster. So the bigger the better, basically. And again, body text should be readable from around 2 meters away. So if you're working at size 24 point font or larger, then you're going to be okay with that. Now you can use stylistic fonts in moderation, but don't go crazy. And there's lots of free fonts available on the web that you can download and use. What I would say is probably try to avoid using funky fonts or confusing fonts anyway in titles, and definitely in body text, because it's going to make your poster harder to read essentially. But you can use them to draw viewers' eyes to certain pieces of information or key facts or something like that. And you should always use a clear sans serif font for body text. By sans serif, I mean a font without the squiggly bits. So don't use something like Times New Roman. Try to stick to a font that's nice and crisp and clear, like Arial or Verdana or Calibri, something like that. And this is the key point, really. And this is it sounds easy, but it's not really. And this is something that both staff and students struggle with. It's the ability to keep the word count down. So you need to be concise, really. So whereas an essay, you could have up to 2,000 words to get your point across, with a poster, really, it needs to be somewhere between 300 and 800 words. So to try and get that message across in poster format isn't easy. So you're going to have to be quite bold, really, in what you choose to cut out. So let's talk about graphics. Well, as I said before, what you don't really want to be doing is importing, say, a photo and then stretching it or making it bigger in any way. So when you're stretching a picture, you're physically stretching the pixels or the dots that make up that picture or that image. So although it might look okay on a screen, which is a low resolution output, when you come to print it at high resolution on a nice, really good quality printer, all those stretched pixels, where they've been stretched, the effect's going to be increased, really. So you're going to, you're going to see all those stretched pixels. It's going to be all blocky and horrible, and it's not going to look very good. So if you've got a digital camera and it goes up to, say, 10 megapixel or 12 megapixel, then put it at that really high setting, that high quality setting, and that image is going to be a lot bigger, physically bigger. So when you put it into your poster, it's already big. You don't need to stretch it. This is an interesting one. Personally, I don't like clip art. I've never really been a fan of Microsoft clip art. And I think, really, posters, as they're, a professional way of displaying, an argument or an idea, you want to be using professional images. So professional images will generally be photos, essentially, photos or vector swirls and swooshes and things like that, or nice background effects. So try to avoid using clip art unless you're using it, say, ironically, or for some sort of artistic effect. Obviously, if you've got charts and graphs, they're a nice visual piece, so they look good on a graphical poster. So put those in too. And this is really important. Lots of people don't consider copyright when they're producing posters or or videos or anything that they do online, but you really should be clued up on copyright and how it works. And essentially, you can get into trouble for just, say, opening Google image search, using an image, and putting it straight on your poster. Because if somebody challenges you, where have you got that image? Who does that belong to? And you say, well, I've just got it off the internet, then you could essentially get into trouble for that. So there's an easy way around that, and that's to look for materials released under what we call a Creative Commons license. Now, this is a license that anyone can use, and as an author, so if let's just say I've taken a really nice picture of a sunset and I want to release that on the web, I can actually give that image a Creative Commons license, which means anyone else in the world can use that image on anything they want, as long as they attribute me as the author of that work. So just like you would reference, an author of a book, when you include their ideas or their arguments in an essay, you essentially do the same thing with images. So if you're looking for Creative Commons materials, and there's a few sites there like Flickr.com, and you can actually search under Yahoo or Google image search, but you need to go into advanced image settings and look for the Creative Commons options. What you might find is if you use a website called Stock Exchange or SXC.hu, you can find better quality images. So, you and me know, most of the material you find on Google image search is quite small. So again, going back to the point earlier on, you don't want to be stretching images. You want to find, huge high resolution images. You want to use specialist photography websites or graphical websites. So Stock Exchange is the best one I've found. And if you use the advanced search, one of the options is to filter out restricted images. You can actually find, images that people released under a Creative Commons license, and what they generally are is really, really big, nice images. So they're going to print really well as well, and you don't also then have to worry about being accused of copyright. You just need to literally attribute that author somewhere on your poster. So that's probably, in your references, you can just put the author of any pictures or graphics in there. Now let's think about software. Now what I will say is it's entirely up to you which software you use to design your poster. But what you need to make sure you consider is that it supports, say high resolution. So it lets you, say, output a poster at A1 size. So you can set up the correct dimensions before you start, and when it prints, it doesn't, scale everything down and make it look rubbish. So what you might like to think about as a place to start is maybe using something like PowerPoint or Publisher, just because they've got the tools that you're familiar with probably already. So unless you're used to going off and doing, loads of logo work and graphical work and things with images, then these are probably the easiest tools to get to grips with. And what I've actually found is PowerPoint is probably the best place to start, just because the graphical tools have been kept quite up to date in line with other things like in Word and stuff, whereas publishers, they haven't really updated it too much over the years. Although you get slightly better quality out of Publisher, PowerPoint has better tools and for things like image manipulation and stuff built in. So I'd recommend using PowerPoint if you can, or if you don't have any other software you want to use. And again, obviously, you're going to get better results with things like Adobe Photoshop or InDesign, because they're designed, for desktop publishing. But they're not free for a start, so, if you haven't got them already, you can't use them. And they're also a lot more complicated to get to grips with. So, if you've just been asked to output an academic poster for, a conference you're going to present at, or, for an assignment you're about to hand in, you haven't got, a year to learn a really complicated bit of software, then just use what you know, and it'll be a lot easier for you and a lot less stressful as well. But again, I keep coming back to it, but it's very important that you remember to set the correct size for your poster before you start. So there you go. So there's A1. So I'm going to produce an A1 poster. I load PowerPoint. The first thing I do before I put any text or content in, or columns or anything like that, is set the page dimensions to be my A1 poster size, or A0 or A3, whatever you want to do. And that's really important. And finally then, just some other links you might like to look at. If you just Google academic posters, you'll find loads and loads of really useful online resources that other institutions, both in the UK, and in America, that have produced. And there's just one there, and I've linked to the University of Leicester. Have got a really useful, simple step-by-step kind of interactive resource for producing academic posters. Again, Flickr image search under Creative Commons will be useful, and you can use that for finding images that are safe, that you don't have to worry about copyright issues, as long as, again, you reference who you've got it from or where you've got it. And the final two there are just the basic Microsoft Publisher and PowerPoint help pages. So if you do start choosing, if you do start designing in either PowerPoint or Publisher, and you forget, say, how to make a column or how to put a nice, circle in or something like that, then use the online Microsoft help pages, because they are generally quite good.